George Russell may have just turned against Mercedes, live in front of the entire Formula One world. He was leading the Canadian Grand Prix, the fastest car on the grid. The championship fight finally back alive. Then suddenly, his Mercedes completely shut down. At full speed. No electronics. No hybrid power. No braking support. Nothing. And while Russell stood stranded on the side of the circuit, watching his title hopes disappear, Kimi Antonelli inherited the lead and cruised toward a fifth consecutive victory. That alone was brutal. But then Russell revealed something that changed everything. He admitted the car had already been making strange noises before the catastrophic failure happened. Now the entire paddock is asking dangerous questions about Mercedes. Did the team ignore warning signs? Did they push the new 2026 power systems too aggressively, chasing dominance? And is George Russell starting to lose trust in Mercedes itself? Because this was not a calm teammate battle anymore. Canada looked like war. For lead changes. Aggressive defending. Constant pressure between Russell and Antonelli. At one point, Antonelli even complained over the radio that Russell was using the full width of the track just to stop him from passing. And throughout the race, Toto Wolff looked visibly tense while both drivers pushed the cars harder and harder. Then came the blackout. And now, instead of celebrating another dominant 1-2 performance, Mercedes is facing something far more dangerous. A furious Russell. A growing reliability crisis. And a garage that suddenly feels emotionally divided. Because after Canada, Mercedes no longer looks like one united championship team. It looks like a team starting to crack under the pressure of its own success. From the very beginning of the weekend, George Russell looked like a driver carrying far more pressure than anyone realized. Because deep down, he understood exactly what Canada represented. This was not just another race. This was probably his last real chance to stop Kimi Antonelli from completely taking over the championship narrative inside Mercedes. And at first, Russell responded perfectly. Pole position in the sprint. Victory in the sprint race. Then another pole for the Grand Prix itself. Everything about his driving looked sharp, aggressive, almost emotional. You could feel the urgency in every lap. Because while Antonelli had spent the last month becoming Formula One's biggest story, Russell was quietly starting to disappear into the background of his own team. For consecutive wins for Antonelli had changed the atmosphere inside Mercedes completely. The confidence around the young Italian was exploding. The media attention was growing every weekend. And inside the paddock, people had already started talking about Antonelli like the future world champion of Mercedes. That changes everything psychologically for the other driver. Especially someone as competitive as Russell. Canada was supposed to be his answer. And from the moment the lights went out, he drove like someone fighting for much more than race victory. His launch off the line was almost perfect. Mercedes had spent weeks improving the clutch software after several weak starts earlier in the season, and in Montreal the difference was immediate. Russell exploded into the first corner. Antonelli tucked in behind him. Then within only a few laps, the two Mercedes cars started pulling away from the entire field. That should have been the perfect situation for the team. A dominant 1-2. Maximum points. Total control of the race. Instead, the atmosphere inside the garage became more tense with every single lap. Because Russell and Antonelli were no longer racing like teammates protecting the team result. They were attacking each other relentlessly. Antonelli kept using DRS trying to break through on the straights. Russell defended aggressively into the chicanes, moving right to the edge of what the regulations would allow. The lead changed multiple times. And every overtake felt personal. At one point, Antonelli complained over the radio that Russell was using the entire width of the track and leaving no room for him to attack properly. Now normally, drivers complain constantly during races. But this felt different. Because underneath the radio messages, you could already feel the frustration building between both sides of the garage. And Toto Wolff looked fully aware of how dangerous the situation was becoming. The cameras kept showing him staring silently at the telemetry screens while both drivers pushed harder and harder. No excitement. No celebration. Just tension. Because dominant Formula One teams fear one thing more than rival teams. Internal wars. And history shows exactly how quickly those situations become toxic. Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg turned Mercedes into a psychological battlefield despite winning championships together. Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost nearly destroyed McLaren from inside during one of the greatest eras in Formula One history. And Canada suddenly felt like Mercedes entering that same territory. Especially because another dangerous problem was quietly developing underneath the bodywork. The car itself was operating under extreme stress. The new 2026 regulations transformed Formula One into a much more electrically aggressive sport. The hybrid systems now produce dramatically more power than previous generations. That means more performance, but also much more heat, pressure, and electrical load. Mercedes pushed those systems harder than almost anyone else this season because the gains were enormous. The upgrades brought to Canada made the W17 look untouchable. Better launches, better traction, better balance through the chicanes. But while Russell and Antonelli fought each other at qualifying intensity every lap, the strain on the power systems kept increasing. More deployment, more energy demand, more heat. And then came the detail that completely changed the story after the race. Russell admitted he had already heard strange noises from the car before the catastrophic shutdown happened. At the time, he ignored them. Drivers always do during a fight for victory. But now, those noises feel like the first warning sign before everything inside Mercedes started breaking apart. Lap 30 changed George Russell completely. Because in that moment, it was no longer just a race retirement. For Russell, it felt like betrayal. He had done everything right. Pole position, sprint victory, leading the Grand Prix, holding off Antonelli under enormous pressure. Then suddenly, entering turn 9, the entire car shut down. Instantly. No gradual warning. No recovery mode. Nothing. Russell later described the moment in brutally simple words. Everything just switched off. No electronics. No regenerative braking. No hybrid deployment. Imagine driving at full speed and suddenly losing power steering and brakes at the exact same time. That is essentially what happened. And the terrifying part is this. Russell already knew something felt wrong before the failure happened. After the race, he admitted hearing strange noises from the car during the battle with Antonelli. At the time, he ignored them. Drivers always do when fighting for victory. But after the retirement, those noises suddenly became one of the most important details of the entire weekend. Because now the attention inside the paddock shifted immediately toward Mercedes' electrical systems. The exact systems the team had pushed harder than almost anyone else under the brutal new 2026 regulations. And this is where the pressure on Mercedes exploded. Reports after the race pointed toward a possible issue involving the inverter connected to the MGUK system. Now for casual fans, that sounds incredibly technical. But think of it like the central power translator inside the car. Without it, the stored electrical energy cannot properly convert into usable performance. If it fails, the entire system collapses instantly. Which perfectly explains Russell's blackout. And the new regulations made those systems far more aggressive than previous generations. Nearly 3 times more electrical power, more speed, more acceleration, but also far more heat and stress. Mercedes accepted that risk because the performance gains were enormous. The upgrades brought to Canada transformed the W17. Better launches, better traction, better balance through the chicanes. The car looked unbeatable. Maybe too unbeatable. Because now rival teams are asking dangerous questions. How close to the limit was Mercedes really operating? And internally, the emotional damage after the retirement became immediate. While Russell climbed out of the car furious and devastated, Antonelli inherited the lead and cruised toward another victory. That emotional contrast inside the garage must have felt brutal. One side of Mercedes dealing with shock and frustration. The other side celebrating a 5th consecutive win. And Formula One teams become incredibly fragile when emotions split like that internally. Because success does not always unite teams. Sometimes it divides them even more. Especially when one driver starts becoming the emotional center of the entire project. And after Canada, Antonelli suddenly feels like that driver. His confidence after the race revealed everything. Kimi Antonelli, world champion. That sentence echoed across the paddock for a reason. Not because it sounded arrogant. Because it sounded believable. Meanwhile, Russell sounded emotionally exhausted. He openly admitted it now feels like the championship belongs to Antonelli unless something dramatic changes later in the season. That statement matters enormously. Because drivers rarely sound that defeated publicly unless frustration has already started building deeply underneath the surface. And then came the sentence that changed the entire atmosphere around Mercedes. Russell admitted the pressure is now gone and that he plans to attack every race moving forward with nothing left to lose. That should terrify Mercedes. Because drivers with nothing to lose become unpredictable. Especially against teammates. And suddenly, Mercedes no longer looks like one calm dominant championship team anymore. It looks like 2 completely different emotional worlds inside the same garage. One driver feels unstoppable. The other feels betrayed by the car itself. And when that combination appears inside Formula One, things usually get dangerous very quickly. And now, Mercedes faces the most dangerous question any dominant Formula One team can face. What happens when one driver stops trusting the team completely? Because after Canada, George Russell no longer sounds like a driver simply frustrated by bad luck. He sounds like someone emotionally disconnected from the system around him. And that changes everything moving forward. Think about the psychological damage of what happened in Montreal. Russell was finally taking control of the championship fight again. He had beaten Antonelli in qualifying, controlled the race pace, defended aggressively under pressure. For the first time in weeks, he looked like the true leader inside Mercedes again. Then the car failed underneath him while his teammate inherited another victory. That kind of moment stays inside a driver's mind for a long time. Especially when the championship gap suddenly explodes to 43 points. Because now Russell enters every remaining race with a completely different emotional mindset. Before Canada, he was still fighting carefully for the title. After Canada, he openly admitted the pressure is gone and that he has nothing left to lose anymore. That sentence may become one of the biggest warning signs of the entire season. Because Formula One drivers become extremely dangerous once they stop protecting outcomes. They attack harder, defend later, take bigger risks, especially against teammates. And meanwhile, Antonelli enters the next races with total confidence. 5 consecutive victories, huge championship lead, complete emotional momentum. That combination creates an incredibly unstable balance inside Mercedes. One driver feels unstoppable, the other feels robbed. And underneath all of this sits another growing fear the team still cannot fully control: reliability. Because Canada exposed something Mercedes may have been hiding from itself. The W17 is unbelievably fast, but possibly operating dangerously close to its limits. The new 2026 regulations dramatically increase the stress on electrical systems. The MGUK now handles far more energy than previous Formula One generations ever experienced. More deployment, more heat, more pressure on every component. Mercedes accepted that risk because the performance gains transformed the car into the fastest package on the grid. But now the price of that aggression may finally be appearing. And rival teams are watching very closely. Because the moment a dominant car shows reliability weakness, the entire paddock starts asking questions. Ferrari wants to know how aggressively Mercedes is running the systems. Red Bull wants to know how close the electrical components are operating to failure. McLaren wants to know whether Mercedes will now be forced to reduce performance to protect reliability. And internally, those same questions create paranoia. What happens if another car fails? What happens if Antonelli suffers the same issue later in the season? What happens if Russell begins believing the team is prioritizing one side of the garage emotionally over the other? Those fears slowly destroy trust inside teams, even without public arguments. And the scary part is that Canada already showed visible signs of emotional fracture. Antonelli frustrated over Russell's defending, Russell refusing to back down aggressively, Toto Wolff staring silently at the telemetry screens while the battle intensified lap after lap. Those moments suddenly feel much bigger now. Because once teammate relationships become emotionally damaged, every future incident carries extra weight. Every strategy decision feels political. Every reliability issue creates suspicion. Every victory creates more tension instead of relief. And history shows how quickly dominant teams can collapse from internal pressure. McLaren experienced it. Mercedes experienced it before with Hamilton and Rosberg. At first, the car remains dominant. Then the emotional fractures slowly become impossible to control. And the terrifying part for Mercedes is this: the biggest threat to their championship may no longer come from Ferrari, Red Bull, or McLaren. It may come from the growing emotional war between George Russell, Kimi Antonelli, and a team suddenly struggling to hold itself together.